Welcome back. We'll get an update this week on Canada's largest housing market when the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board releases its data for March. It was an eventful month with the Bank of Canada pausing rate hikes and the turmoil gripping the financial sector in the U.S. and in Europe. Paige Ellis spoke to the head of a prominent Toronto brokerage, Heaps Estrin, inside a $6 million home. She asked Kaylee Heaps how the spring buying season is shaping up.
We have a chronic issue with supply, but the people who are coming to market are being rewarded with lots of interest. So I'd say the majority of our listings are selling quickly, and many of them with multiple offers.
Interesting, because I do know that when we sort of zoom out, we are seeing prices down, sales down, we're seeing days on the market move higher than a year ago, for example, which was, of course, a pretty high watermark.
It was.
But you said you're seeing seeds of change specifically in the $2 to $4 million property range.
That's right.
Expand on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a few things have happened. First of all, when you're looking at the stats, you have to remember that's all of the GTA. And the area around the city, sort of that horseshoe around the city, the suburbs, perform very differently than the central core of Toronto. So in Toronto, the reason we're seeing the price increase in that $2 to $4 million range, I think buyers have come back to the market with confidence. They understand that the interest rate environment is more stable now, whereas in the last half of 2022, we were used to seeing rates changing, every few weeks, months. And I think that with the chronic lack of inventory that they've experienced, those buyers have experienced throughout their search, they understand that this might not be the ideal market from an interest rate perspective. But if they see a house they like, they need to act on it, because it could be months before something else comes. So I think that's, I think that the demand and the confidence in the Toronto real estate market has now really picked up. Consumer confidence is back.
And you said you're seeing a lot of multiple offers on properties now, but how much of that is just a reflection of the supply crunch?
I'd say a lot of it, it's all driven by supply, in my opinion. I have a buyer I just recently sold a home to. They'd been looking for 7 years. I know. So if you have a very specific search criteria, and they bought in this environment, they'd been in every market, and the product they wanted came. So I think that people are really understanding that Toronto on a long-term basis is a very stable investment.
So that's the buyer's side. The seller's side, you'd mentioned in a blog post that came out a while ago that you sometimes come up against what you described as sort of a pandemic era mindset, where people are still expecting, to fetch those really high prices.
Yeah.
How does that play out? Is that changing? And how does it maybe distort the market?
It's a really good question. So a lot of sellers were hesitant to enter the market in late 2022 because they felt they were losing money, but they weren't really. So the way I approach it, as I say, if you look at the market in Toronto, go back 50 years and you look at a chart, it is on a straight increase. We're back maybe to 2021 numbers, but if they had called me in 2021, they would have been thrilled with the number I was telling them. So we just have to delete the first 6 months of 2022. And a lot of people, now that we're in the 2023 market and seeing an increase in demand and the stabilization in the market, I think those sellers are now more interested in coming to market. And they'll be rewarded for doing so. That lack of inventory is a serious issue in the central core.
I have a really hard time wrapping my head around the real estate market in Toronto and across the country. Even at a place like RBC, Canada's largest lender, they don't have a cohesive narrative within their own, within themselves. Like an RBC executive recently said they're expecting a slow start to the spring market because interest rates are keeping buyers out. But then there was another note from RBC noting that the housing market is, quote, finding its footing.
Yeah.
Can all these things be true? How do we reconcile all the signals we're getting?
It's I look at the reports that the various banks issue or real estate experts issue, and I sort of chuckle to myself because you can't possibly predict an entire nation's real estate performance. It's going to depend. I would imagine that rural Saskatchewan is probably not having the best market. If you look at the big cities, we have things, immigration fuels us. I hate to go on about supply, but that does fuel our market. So in the neighborhoods or in the cities that have that pressure, I think we will perform well. I think when you read stats, they say that prices are going to drop 20 to 40%. Those are referencing sort of the tertiary markets in the country.
What about foreign buyers as a driver?
So foreign buyers is always so topical in Toronto, and certainly it is a segment of our market. It's never exceeded sort of 6 to 7% of our buying population. So it's still a small part of our market. A foreign buyer ban that was introduced by the government, the buyers who are still keen on buying will find a way to do so. They did with the last, government interference. They found their way around it.
You at Heaps Estrin, you sell everything from to first home buyers to the ultra luxury segment. Let's talk about the ultra luxury segment. How's that performing right now?
Yeah, so it is active. Even in that segment of the market, we have a lack of inventory. So I said to someone recently, if I had 10 listings priced between, call it 8 and 15 million in Rosedale, I would sell them all in a week. There is demand. There's just not inventory, but it's performing. You have to remember in the pandemic, the wealthy became wealthier. So there is still a lot of money out there, and most of those buyers don't rely on interest rates.
Let's talk about first-time home buyers. Banks will start offering this new savings tool. It's the tax-free first home savings account. Will this really make a big impact, a meaningful impact on first-time home buyers?
I don't know that it will have a huge impact immediately. It's a $40,000 tax advantage, but it will help. I mean, if you look at how hard it is to enter the market, there is a huge amount of intergenerational transfer of wealth. But for the people who don't benefit from that, this is an easier way to save your money for a down payment.
We also know we're coming off the heels of a lot of turmoil in the banking sector with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. How has that affected the mortgage market here in Canada? Yeah,
so I mean, with the collapse of the bank, we've seen that interest rates for our clients who are already pre-approved in process, so they've been pre-approved and they have a home that they've bought but haven't yet closed, the guaranteed rate actually went down. So I think it's reasonable to expect that the interest rates will start to come down. It might not be this month, but within 2023 we will see the interest rates start to reverse.
It's been more than 50 years since astronauts last went to the moon, and yesterday's announcement was a big deal for Canada. Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen earning a spot on the Artemis II mission, which is set to launch a lunar flyby late next year. The flight will include 3 other astronauts from the U.S. with the goal of putting a man and woman on the moon as early as 2025. Back at home, we also talk about moonshots, early-stage companies without near-term expectations for profitability, but some big dreams. Claudio Rojas knows something about that. He's been investing in them for a very long time, and he's the CEO of the National Angel Capital Organization and leads more than 4,000 angel investors that have invested more than $1 billion into new companies. Just had a big event surrounding that, and he joins us here in studio. Nice to see you.
John, great to be here.
So this idea of the moonshot, I mean, what is a moonshot business in Canada in 2023?
So a moonshot company is a company that's in the earlier stages that's on track to become the world leading, the world dominating company of the future.
And the idea obviously is a big one, but it has to be rooted in some real opportunity, I imagine. I mean, what's that like? What's the passion like right now? And what's the financial opportunity here?
So Canada is blessed to have extraordinary founders across the country that have expertise in a wide variety of areas, whether it's cybercrime, cybersecurity, to lithium extraction, to artificial intelligence. And so these founders with grit and tenacity are building companies that could become the moonshot companies, the unicorn companies of the future. And a unicorn company is a company that grows to a valuation of $1 billion or more. So in terms of the investment opportunity, if you invest in a company that's worth $10 million today, and they grow to become a unicorn company worth $1 billion 5 years from now, you've generated a significant return. That is a 100x return.
And in your industry, though, you have to be prepared for just a few of those names to become the reality, I suppose.
Absolutely. Just like the public markets, you want to diversify across a broad range of companies within the asset class. But every investor that's listening to this show should have some exposure to the Canadian innovation economy. And it would be an exposure from 5 to 7%. And that would follow broad diversification portfolio diversification principles.
What's interesting, especially at a time when people talk about technology and AI, it is a reminder that innovation doesn't have to be tied to a new industry per se, right? It seems like a lot of the folks who are looking to shake things up or have noticed things within existing industries.
That's right. And so things like ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, even blockchain will cut across all companies, established and emerging. And it's also creating new opportunities for world-changing companies of the future to lift off of. And so these are platform technologies that will change the future of every industry.
So for a business that is started here in Canada, for years we've talked about what kind of an environment it is to launch a business in this country, and it seems like a lot has changed with venture capital. There's a lot more capital out there. There's certainly a lot more awareness. What still has to happen to help those ideas to grow and grow and grow the same way that there's the legend that is Silicon Valley?
So we're building a future where there will be the legend that is Canada. And Canada is well positioned to be the world's leading innovation economy, but we have to plan ahead. And so we have all the ingredients to emerge as the world's leading innovation economy. We have great founders, great research institutions. We have these extraordinary resilient banks. We have large pension funds, but we're a risk-averse culture. And so we need to move away from risk aversion to making big bets on our homegrown Canadian companies. And we need to be long-term oriented. And so the companies that we invest in today, it might take 10, 15 years to see a return, but you'll see an extraordinary return. It will diversify your portfolio, and you'll be helping Canada to emerge in this really powerful way. And it's important that Canada leads in so many areas that will be critical to the future of our children and our grandchildren.
You talked about everyone should consider being an angel investor in let's say a diversified investment portfolio. What's that like? How do you go about becoming an angel investor?
Get involved with NACO Canada. We have a ton of free resources, available to all your viewers on how to situate it around the innovation economy. So on the nacocanada.com website, there are over 100 members. We're an umbrella organization of venture funds, angel groups, and the extraordinary incubators and accelerators around the country.
And what about for the company founders themselves? If they've got this idea and they know they've got the skills to get it on at least some kind of track, how do they go about figuring out the money issue?
Right, so they reach out to us, we connect them into our extraordinary members around the country. We have more than 100 organizations in every community, and the supports that are available to them include mentorship, how to build your business, how to build a cap table, how to prepare your company for due diligence. And then like you experienced at Moonshots, John, you were there. There was capital in the room, there were entrepreneurs in the room, and we were bridging those connections so that the best investors could meet with the best founders, and they can support each other in building and investing in the world-changing technologies of the future.
We do, at least in the public markets, have a couple of examples of companies that started as an idea and became global players, like Shopify, which we talk about today. I mean, is there anything about the Shopify example that sits with you or sticks with you on what they were able to do to take that big idea and actually make it one of these companies we talk about every day on television?
Shopify began around in a similar environment to what we currently are, where it was a turbulent economic environment, but there's never a bad time to invest in a great company, as Warren Buffett likes to say. And Toby started as an entrepreneur with a snowboard shop. He learned, he adapted, he pivoted, and then he built this world-changing technology. And so those companies are being founded now in this current economic environment, and it is a great time to be an investor.
Okay, we'll be watching closely. Claudio, thanks very much for your time.
Welcome back. Now, in times of macro uncertainty and supply chain disruptions, it's important for the industry and government to focus on crop productivity to support growing populations. Now, the world's biggest producer, potash, Nutrien, plays a leading role in finding solutions for growers to improve sustainable agriculture. For insight, we're joined by Ken Seitz, of course, the president and CEO of Nutrien. Talk about a blockbuster year. Your company very much in focus, really well into last year when we saw the Russia-Ukraine conflict kick off, but the price of your company in terms of stock price action down 22% over the course of this year. We can start by, discussing sort of from an investor perspective. RBC, for instance, has taken your company out of their list of 30 global stocks to watch right now because they're concerned about the price upside. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, obviously, 2022 was a strong year for Nutrien, and owing to the challenges in Eastern Europe. And what we did see is some inventory movements in 2022 that entering 2023, we knew were being drawn down, and the growers would have to step back into the market, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, for their planting season to replenish those inventories. And so here we are at the start of the planting season in North America, in the Northern Hemisphere. And we're starting to see exactly that. Volumes moving through the channel. And again, the backdrop for the ag fundamentals being very strong. Growers have all the incentives to lay down the appropriate crop nutrients in an environment where these supply side challenges continue.
Are you worried at all about those traditional summer slowdowns that weigh into a market like yours?
Well, again, we're looking at inventories in the channel. We're looking at inventories of crop nutrients in the soil. And again, we'd look at the economics for the grower at the moment, and with corn north of $6 and soybeans north of 14, I mean, there's a very strong commodity price. So again, we're looking at the grower. While there's been some apprehension among the growers as they've watched fertilizer prices soften and, of course, watching their margins grow, we know that they'll have to step into the market when serious volumes start moving through the channel and laying down the appropriate crop nutrients to maximize yields in this strong ag commodity priced environment.
We've got this helpful chart that's been pulled up here, the evolution of potash prices. I want to apply that to your deal with Mosaic related to Indian potash. We saw the price that you agreed to there, $422 a metric ton through September, well below last year's price of $590. That reinforces the argument that some analysts have in the marketplace in terms of the upside for this sector as a whole. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say that $422 is still a historically very strong price for our commodity. And so we're watching, obviously, the other contract market, China, but essentially what happens here is that when those contracts get written, and now in India, we essentially puts a bit of a floor in the market, and it allows other markets to start, pointing to that form of price discovery, start moving volume. So historically, still very strong pricing. I have to keep in mind that last year when that contract was settled, it was exactly in this environment where, supply side challenges, conflict in Eastern Europe, inventories low, prices flying up, and so $590 settlement. But again, we would look at $422 and say that's still a very strong price historically.
Let's look at the big picture view. Of course, the geopolitical instability that continues to ravage Eastern Europe right now. Let's talk about what's happening there and what you see in terms of that long-term view for your company.
Yeah, for potash, last year, watching inventories and watching volumes move out of some of those big export markets like Belarus and Russia, we saw that Belarusian volumes were down compared to 2021 levels by over 50%. And that Russian volumes were down by close to 30%. And that was after, over the course of 2022, those markets looking for outlets into the balance of the planet in the big ag markets of the world. Looking into 2023 now, with those alternatives exhausted, we're saying that we think Belarusian volumes will be down 40 to 60% compared to 2021 levels, and 15 to 30% out of Russia. And so, we continue to see these supply side challenges. Belarusians, no access to tidewater as the port in Lithuania continues to be closed to them, and then, the Russians with sanctions on those export facilitating activities are making it difficult. So again, we expect that there'll be these supply side challenges again in 2023.
The last time you spoke to us, you discussed those inflation headwinds very much weighing on your business like so many of your peers. Where are we now?
Yeah, we're definitely experiencing some inflationary pressures. We see that on labor. We see that on some of our inputs. And that said, we are also experiencing productivity gains and we're also increasing our production. So on a unit basis, we are finding that we can offset those inflationary pressures with increased production.
What are you looking forward to sort of in terms of demand or new ventures moving forward into successive quarters?
So demand for potash and crop nutrients really continues to grow. The world population is growing 10 billion people by 2050, and we're going to have to produce more food with a decreasing rate of arable land expansion. And so that means crop nutrients. So we expect that our demand for our commodities will continue to grow 2.5% average annual growth rates. That's what we're planning for, so that when we talk about increasing production, it's really with that backdrop of growing demand.
And who's been reaching out to you amid the recessionary woes that we clearly have right now weighing into the marketplace? That's not going away. And so, how is that? Who is reaching out to you in terms of markets, frontier markets, new places for you to be growing your business?
Yeah, we move our products to over 40 countries around the world. We have customers in those countries that we've been working with for some of them for over 50 years. So, we continue to work with those customers, and they're in the big bread baskets of the world, continue to feed the planet.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Ken Seitz, President and CEO of Nutrien. Thank you so much for joining us.
Now, by now, you've probably heard of pickleball, which is a combination of tennis and ping pong. Recent data suggests that it is the fastest growing sport in the U.S. with over 36 million players, including major celebrities like Eva Longoria, Tom Brady, Kevin Durant, Michael Phelps, and LeBron James. Now there is Major League Pickleball, and it has its own draft and a full array of sponsors. To talk about the business side of this burgeoning sport, let's bring in Brian Levine. He's interim CEO of Major League Pickleball. Brian, thank you so much for being with us. I don't even know where to start. I kind of want to start with you because how does somebody go from, 25 years at Goldman Sachs to now leading this burgeoning sport that is pickleball? Is there like a condensed version of how you got where you are?
Yeah, no, that's it's pretty funny. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm leading it. There's a lot of people that are involved, but yeah, I spent 25 years at Goldman Sachs. I was just listening to your equity highlights before. I was bringing back some memories. I used to run the equity trading business at Goldman. I retired 3 or 4 years ago, and like many people, I got into pickleball when COVID hit, and I got very addicted to it, as many people did. Ended up playing on the senior pro tour, and given my business background, I got involved on the business side. And Major League Pickleball has been around really just about a year or two, but it's grown exponentially. We had 8 teams 2 years ago. We had 12 teams last year. We've expanded to 24 this year. And it's a really neat concept of, it's gender equity. We have 2 men and 2 women. Each team has 4 players. We had a draft in December. The first overall pick was a 16-year-old woman. And it's incredibly exciting. The growth that we've had. It's something that the participation's incredible, and for us, it's all about converting those players into fans of the pro game.
Okay, I'm going to resist the urge to ask you about tech stocks right now, and instead continue to talk about pickleball. Can we just start with, how is it played? What are the rules? And we mentioned it's kind of this hybrid tennis ping pong. How does it all work?
Yeah, so it's, I think it's more like ping pong than tennis. The court size is about a quarter of the size of tennis, but the paddles are light. The balls are essentially a wiffle ball. So it's also, it's been around for a little over 50 years. It was actually founded in Seattle, Washington. And it's something that I think most people it was more for senior citizens. And a lot of it is because it's actually pretty easy on the body. I think largely because you're not running as much. There's a good bit of shuffling. It's definitely active, largely because there's not a lot of rest, right? In tennis, you're not playing that much. And given it's a quantitative audience, I'll say that if you watch a tennis match, the ball's in play for about 10 to 20% of the time. For pickleball, the ball's active about 50% of the time. So you are getting a good amount of work. But it doesn't have really the sprinting and the shoulder torque that you will find. So I think older people, played it more traditionally. And when COVID started, it really picked up with a younger demographic. In fact, that data point that you had mentioned that had, you said 36 million American adults have played, that they actually just updated that. That was 6 months old. It's now 48 million. They said have played at least once over the past 12 months, but the average age has dropped to 35, right? So a lot of younger people are playing. It's very similar to tennis, except that you have what's called a kitchen line. So within 7 feet of the net, you're just not allowed to go into it to hit a volley. So what that does, it kind of creates a bit of a chess dynamic to the game, where instead of hitting a lob when you're in a bad situation, you just hit it softly in front of the kitchen, and it creates a lot of interesting, slow, fast dynamics, as well as a lot of interesting angles that create some interesting gameplay.
So with that kind of growth, and you got the Kardashians playing it, so now you've got a hit on your hands. Can we talk about the financial backing it takes to take this to the next level? Who financially backs you? What kind of sponsorship are we getting? Here in Canada, CIBC kind of positioned itself, the bank, as the banker to the Caravana Professional Pickleball Association. What are you seeing in terms of the financial heft behind this sport?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly given the trend of pickleball, we've had some tremendous demand. We sold the last 2 teams that we sold valued us at several $100 million. They bought equity in the league. Some of the names that are involved in our 24 teams include Tom Brady, Kevin Durant, Naomi Osaka, Mark Cuban. And we're now regionally based, although our events are together. That's from a funding perspective. I'd say from a revenue perspective, we're primarily sponsorship driven. And there's a tremendous demand for things like merchandise and products, and obviously media rights eventually is going to be significant. Just to give you an idea of the translation to spectator sports, just this past weekend there was an event called Pickle Slam that aired on ESPN that had an interesting matchup between John McEnroe and Michael Chang versus Andy and Andre Agassi. And those numbers just came out, and they did 700,000 average views, 800,000 peak, which actually had greater viewership than the vast majority of Major League Baseball, NBA, and NHL games that weekend, and it was actually 3 times higher than the Miami Open finals. So there's definitely a lot of interest in the game, and it's fairly fascinating to watch it at the pro level. And we actually have a contract with Anthem. So we have several more events this year, and Anthem's going to be broadcasting all of our matches throughout Canada.
It's interesting to talk about media rights. Can I just ask, and it has to be my last question, unfortunately, but are we going to do something about the name? Do you think pickleball is going to be the name? And I've heard so many mixed things about where the name came from. Was it from a dog? Was it from this concept of a boat? Can you settle it for once and for all?
I wish I could, but I'd have to go back to Bainbridge Island in 1965. They're really not quite sure. I do think the boat has probably sailed on renaming it, but it does create a lot of quirkiness that I think is specific to the sport too. I think the sport is also very much about positivity and inclusivity, and it's very different than most sports. When people play, it's a very positive experience, and so in a lot of ways, I think the name does fit.
Does that change the marketing too, and the type of sponsors that you traditionally be attracted to sport? I think so. Our title sponsor is Margaritaville, right? And they if you know anything about Margaritaville, they're very much fairly laissez-faire about having fun, and so I think that does they do represent a lot about the sport, and I think it's a lot about the players as well. So I think it's a little bit different, but we do have a lot of traditional sponsors as well. All right, Brian, I'll ask you about tech stocks next time. Thanks so much for joining us.